Picture this. A man who once commanded stadiums of screaming fans now sits alone in a gray prison cell, writing letters no one will ever answer. His name was everywhere. His face sold magazines. But when the world turned its back, only one person refused to forget. This is the story of Damon Kurt, and the woman who proved that loyalty doesn't need a spotlight. The late 80s and early 90s belonged to Damon Kurt. If you turned on a radio, you'd hear his voice. If you walked past a newsstand, his face smiled back from every cover. Damon wasn't just famous. He was a phenomenon. His concerts didn't just sell out. They became cultural events. 50,000 people singing his lyrics back to him. Lighters swaying in the darkness like a sea of stars. He had the kind of charisma that made you feel like he was singing directly to you, even from a stage 100 yards away. But here's what the cameras didn't always catch. Damon was generous to a fault. Crew members on his tours still tell stories about how he'd order pizza for everyone at 3 a.m. during grueling setup sessions. How he'd sit at the back of the tour bus with the backup singers and sound engineers, not in some luxury suite, just talking, listening, playing acoustic versions of new songs and asking, "What do you think? Does this hit right?" His bandmates loved him. His managers adored him. Charities fought for his endorsement because when Damon Kurt showed up, donations poured in. He performed at benefit concerts for free, visited children's hospitals without press releases, donated instruments to schools that couldn't afford music programs. The world saw the diamond-studded reality, the mansions, the private jets, the supermodels on his arm. But the people closest to him saw something rarer. A man who'd somehow kept his humanity intact despite the hurricane of fame swirling around him. Have you ever seen someone at the top of the world and wondered how it could all change in an instant? Drop a comment if you've witnessed a fall from grace, because Damon's was about to be catastrophic. By 1997, Damon Kurt seemed untouchable. His album Electric Horizon had gone platinum 3 times over. He was planning a world tour that would span 18 months. Forbes estimated his net worth at $70 million. But behind the glittering facade, something had gone terribly wrong. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March 1998. Federal investigators had been building a case for 2 years. Tax fraud, millions in unreported income, shell companies, offshore accounts. The details were complex, the evidence overwhelming. Damon's financial team had made moves they swore would protect him, but those moves had crossed lines he didn't even know existed. When the indictment came down, it exploded across every media outlet in America. Pop King faces prison. Damon Kurt, from riches to bars. $1 million voice, $1 million crimes. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Cameras lined the courthouse steps every single day. His legal team fought hard, but the prosecution was relentless. And when the jury foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on 7 counts, you could hear the collective gasp ripple through the courtroom. Sentencing. 6 years in federal prison. And just like that, everything changed. His record label dropped him within 48 hours. His endorsement deals evaporated overnight. The mansion went up for sale. His agent, the man who discovered him, who'd called him family for 15 years, sold private studio recordings to tabloids for 6 figures. But the betrayal went deeper than business. His bandmates released a statement distancing themselves from him. Friends he'd known since high school stopped returning calls. The woman he'd dated for 3 years gave an interview calling him manipulative and secretive, things she'd never once hinted at when they were together. His fan club, 30,000 members strong, officially disbanded. The president issued a statement saying they could no longer support someone who'd betrayed the public trust. Damon wrote letters, hundreds of them, to his former bandmates, to his collaborators, to friends who'd stayed at his home, eaten at his table, borrowed his money when they needed help. He wrote from his cell, pouring his heart onto paper, apologizing for the scandal, asking for nothing but a reminder that he'd once mattered to someone. Not one letter was answered. Not one. If this story is hitting different, smash that like button, because it's about to go a whole lot deeper. Federal Correctional Institution, Englewood, Colorado. That became Damon Kurt's new address. The walls were gray. The routine was suffocating. Wake at 6. Breakfast at 7. Work detail. Lunch. More work. Rec time if you earned it. Dinner. Lights out. No screaming fans. No applause. No one asking for autographs or selfies. Just the silence. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. The kind that forces you to confront every mistake, every regret, every moment you took for granted. Damon kept writing letters for the first year, then the second, but as the stack of unanswered envelopes grew, something inside him began to crack. He'd lie on his bunk at night, staring at the ceiling, and ask himself the question that haunted him most. Had any of it been real? The friendships, the love, the loyalty people swore they had for him, were they ever about him or just about what he represented? The access, the glamour, the proximity to fame. When the spotlight dies, do the people around it die too? He started wondering if he'd ever actually been seen, really seen, or if everyone had just been staring at the reflection of their own ambitions in his success. The philosophical weight of it crushed him some days. He'd been surrounded by thousands of people for a decade and somehow ended up more alone than he'd ever been as a kid, sharing a bedroom with two brothers in a cramped apartment in Detroit. Fame without connection, he realized, is just noise. Success without loyalty is just emptiness dressed up in expensive clothes. And in that gray, silent cell, Damon Kurt had nothing but emptiness. But there was one person who refused to let him disappear. Her name was April Monroe. If you'd asked most people in Damon's orbit who April was, they wouldn't have known. She wasn't famous. She wasn't on the covers of magazines. She didn't have millions in the bank or a penthouse in Manhattan. April was a backup singer. She'd toured with Damon back in the early days, 1989 to 1991, before he became a household name, before the stadiums and the private jets, back when the tour bus broke down every other week, and they performed in theaters that seated 800 people instead of 80,000. She remembered a different Damon, the one who'd share his meal with the crew when catering ran short. The one who'd stay up until 3 a.m. playing piano in empty venues, working through melodies, trying to get a song just right. The one who'd ask the lighting tech about his daughter's soccer games and actually remember the score the next time they talked. April had watched Damon rise. She'd cheered for him from the sidelines, genuinely happy to see his talent recognized. She'd moved on with her life, taught voice lessons, sang in church, lived quietly. But she'd never forgotten the man behind the music. When the conviction came down and the headline screamed, April didn't see a criminal. She saw someone she'd once known. Someone who'd been kind when kindness wasn't required. Someone who treated backup singers like they mattered. So she made a decision. Every month, April Monroe took a train from Pennsylvania to Colorado. 3 hours each way. She'd pack a small bag, bring a thermos of coffee, and make the journey to FCI Englewood. No cameras, no public statements, no social media posts about her loyalty or standing by him, just presence. April's choice to show up says something we all need to hear. If you've ever been that person for someone or wish you had been, let me know in the comments. And if this resonates, hit subscribe. You're part of something real here. The first time Damon saw her name on the visitor list, he thought it was a mistake. April Monroe. He hadn't heard from her in 7 years. Why would she come now? But when he walked into that visiting room and saw her sitting there, gray streaks in her hair now, reading glasses perched on her nose, a soft smile on her face, something in his chest broke open. "Hey, superstar," she said quietly. He almost cried right there. April's visits became Damon's anchor. Every month, like clockwork, she'd appear. They'd sit across from each other at a scratched plastic table in a room full of other inmates and their visitors, and they'd just talk. She told him about the outside world. Not the headlines or the gossip, just life. How her garden was doing. The new coffee shop that opened downtown. Her nephew's graduation. The way the leaves looked that October. Burnt orange and gold. Normal things. Human things. Damon found himself looking forward to those visits more than anything else. April didn't treat him like a criminal or a cautionary tale. She didn't lecture him or demand explanations. She just showed up and reminded him that he was still a person, not just a headline. Over time, he opened up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. He talked about the guilt he carried, not just for the legal mistakes, but for losing himself in the machinery of fame, for letting people around him make decisions he should have questioned, for being so focused on the next album, the next tour, the next milestone that he'd stopped paying attention to what mattered. April listened, really listened, and sometimes she'd share her own struggles, raising 2 kids as a single mom, losing her voice for 6 months to nodules, the fear that she'd never sing again. She didn't compare pain or try to minimize his. She just offered her story as proof that everyone faces darkness, and everyone needs someone to sit with them in it. The other inmates noticed. They'd see this older woman with a kind smile visiting the guy who used to be famous, and some of them would ask Damon about it. That your mom? No, he'd say. She's a friend. Must be some friend coming all this way. Damon would nod, unable to fully articulate what April's visits meant. How do you explain that someone's presence can be the difference between surviving and drowning? That loyalty isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet and relentless and more valuable than anything fame ever gave you? April became more than a visitor. She became proof that he still existed outside the cage. That somewhere in the world, someone remembered the real him, not the version the media built up and then tore down, but the actual human being. And slowly, something in Damon shifted. The bitterness began to soften. The anger cooled. He started participating in the prison education program, helping other inmates prepare for their GED tests. He joined a music group, teaching younger guys how to play guitar. He wasn't performing for applause anymore. He was just being, and it felt more authentic than anything he'd done on stage. April had saved him without ever trying to, just by showing up. 6 years is a long time to be forgotten. But in March 2004, Damon Kurt walked out of FCI Englewood a free man. The media circus was waiting, of course. Cameras, reporters shouting questions, microphones thrust in his face like weapons. Damon, what's next for you? Will you make music again? Do you have a statement about your conviction? He stood there on the steps, thinner than he'd been, older, quieter. He'd prepared a few words, nothing elaborate. But then someone asked a question that mattered. Who supported you through this? Damon paused. He could have named lawyers. Could have thanked some faceless fans who might or might not have cared. Could have deflected entirely. Instead, he looked directly at the camera and said, "One person remembered the real me." He didn't elaborate, didn't name April publicly, because what they had wasn't for consumption. It wasn't a media story or a redemption arc to be packaged and sold. It was sacred. It was real. The reporters kept shouting. But Damon just walked to the car where April was waiting, out of frame, away from the cameras. She'd driven 8 hours to pick him up because she didn't trust him to navigate the circus alone. They drove back to Pennsylvania in comfortable silence, stopping at a diner halfway for coffee and pie. No fanfare, no announcement, just 2 people who'd chosen each other when it would have been easier to walk away. April never sought recognition for what she'd done. She didn't write a book or give interviews. She went back to teaching voice lessons and singing in church and living her quiet life. But in Damon's heart, her name was written in permanent ink. This is what real loyalty looks like. If this story moved you, don't just watch, be part of the conversation. Like, share, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories that matter. And tell me, who's your April? Who showed up when no one else did? Years later, when Damon finally returned to music, smaller venues, independent releases, nothing like the empire he'd once had, he'd dedicate every performance to the friend who never left. People would speculate about who that was, but anyone who really knew didn't need to ask. Here's the truth about fame that nobody wants to admit. It's conditional. It loves you when you're winning. It worships you when you're untouchable. But the moment you stumble, the moment you're no longer useful or entertaining or profitable, it turns its back so fast you'll get whiplash. Damon Kurt learned that the hardest way possible. He went from being adored by millions to being abandoned by everyone. His crime? Making financial mistakes. Serious ones, yes, but mistakes nonetheless. The kind people recover from, learn from, grow beyond. Yet the world didn't want his growth. It wanted his destruction. And in that destruction, April Monroe became something rarer than any platinum record. A person whose loyalty wasn't transactional. She didn't visit because she wanted something from him. She didn't stay because it benefited her career or boosted her profile. She showed up because she'd seen who he really was years before fame exploded. And she refused to let scandal erase that person from existence. That's the kind of loyalty that changes lives. Think about your own life for a moment. Who are the people standing in your corner, not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are? And just as importantly, who are you showing up for when the world tells them they don't matter anymore? We live in a culture obsessed with status, with influence, with numbers and metrics and visibility. We celebrate people when they're on top and ghost them when they're struggling. We're quick to condemn and slow to forgive. But April Monroe reminds us that there's a different way to love people, a way that isn't loud or performative, a way that doesn't need applause or recognition, a way that simply shows up month after month, train ride after train ride, conversation after conversation, until the person on the other side remembers they're not alone. Damon and April never became a Hollywood ending. He didn't regain his empire. She didn't become famous for her compassion. But what they had was something the world can't manufacture or monetize. Genuine connection. Real loyalty. The kind of friendship that survives the worst storms not because it's strong, but because it refuses to let go. So here's the lesson Damon Kurt learned in that gray prison cell, and the one April Monroe lived every time she boarded that train. Compassion doesn't need a spotlight. Loyalty doesn't need an audience. And the truest measure of who someone is isn't how they treat you when you're on top. It's whether they remember your name when you've hit bottom. The world will forget you. Fame will fade. Success will crumble. But if you're lucky, truly impossibly lucky, you'll have one person who refuses to let you disappear. And that person will matter more than anything else ever did.